So thanks for coming today. So this is part of the Taiwanese American intergenerational trauma series with Yvonne. So first, a bit about the space. This is Daybreak. It was founded by New Bloom magazine. We were founded 10 years ago around the time of the Sunflower movement in its aftermath. And we operate as an online publication writing on social issues, politics, and so forth. And a few years ago, around 4 years ago, we decided that opening a space was a way to take these conversations online, also offline, because particularly COVID showed that community is quite important. And so thanks again for coming today, and I'll just let Yvonne take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Brian's amazing.
He is.
And for some reason, when we talk about intergenerational trauma, this is like the third time it's raining. Okay, but it's great to be here. I want to talk about the motives, the reason I really want to start this series, and especially today's topic, because I'm a family therapist. As I see a lot of first generation and second generation Taiwanese American immigrants. Some of them are still in the U.S. Some of them moved back either temporarily or permanently. And my work with them, let me talk about decolonizing therapy first. So in April, I was in the U.S. joining American Counseling Association in New Orleans, and the whole theme is multicultural counseling and social justice. And I see how African Americans are really enthusiastic talking about decolonizing therapy in a historical context. The past does impact the present, and they're so open talking about slavery history and the social oppression and the system. But when I come back to Taiwan, I've been working as a therapist here for about 10 years, and I feel therapy is still a taboo and a stigma here, even though more and more young people are willing to come in. But Taiwan didn't really have private practice until 5 years ago. It just started, it's very new. So how did our parents and grandparents do their healing? Where did they go? So this is my question. And now since I'm practicing for 10 years, I'm starting to see some of the seniors, elderlies, my parents' generation. It's a tough population to work with. They carry a lot of intergenerational trauma, and the society kind of abandoned them and their parents. This is a generation that's invisible. And I feel their voice, their stories, they deserve to be heard. And they're very important. So now in the Taiwan social atmosphere here, when the whole society is talking about AI, talking about the elections, how many people would really care about our seniors upbringing, their story, and their trauma? And how many would really want to understand why it's so difficult for them to get into therapy and start their healing? Why they are reluctant, why they have that stigma and resistance. And I kind of get it after working with a lot of families, and I even get it through working with their children, their adult children, and even their grandchildren. So when we talk about decolonizing therapy, this is something the Western theory cannot teach Taiwan, because Taiwan's history from 1949, but first of all, it's always been a colony. So even before 1949, it was a very unique land. So people here went through very unique history. And particularly after 1949, it's a new country. So China and Taiwan parted. They went on their own journey. They started their own stories after 1949. So now in the US, when we're learning about psychotherapy, in the textbook, they always talk about Asian American as one population. And then if you go deeper, maybe you can talk about Chinese American. But now a lot of people will talk about Taiwanese American. But if you compare the Taiwan history and the China history after 1949, it's completely two different stories. So actually there is no theory and no orientation that can really understand certain generations of Taiwanese American. And then we need to create our own model. So next year in the American Counseling Association, the annual convention in Orlando, end of March, I'm gonna go. I signed up and I'm gonna give a talk about Taiwanese history and the decolonizing therapy work that we are doing here. So if any of you are interested, please contact me and join me. So today I want to ask you the first question. In what year did your parents immigrate to the US? This is a very important question. Let's start with 1950. Think about the year they went. Raise a hand if your parents moved to the US or moved overseas in the 1950s and 60s. 70s. Your 80s. 90s? 80, 90s, after 2000. Okay, so every hand will have a unique story. So most of you around 1980s, right? That means your parents grew up in the 50s and 60s. And that's a very unique time of Taiwan. And why does that matter, the year? Because the history is frozen at the year they moved to the US, so they carried that part of Taiwan with them. And then what happened to Taiwan prior to that is very important when we do family history assessment. So we're gonna have to do, if we work with family, we have to do different assessment. Parents' history and adult children's history. Adult children maybe half time in Taiwan or maybe entire life in the US. Okay, but today we're targeting Taiwanese American, and sorry for those who grew up somewhere else. So this assessment is particularly important, but when they come to therapy, a lot of therapists will categorize them under Chinese culture. They have a lot of assumptions. Particularly, they are doing well and their families are fine. They are better now. So this would minimize a lot of history, okay? So those invisible history is something that we want to revisit today. And the first thing I want to talk about is the colonial mindset. Growing up in Taiwan, it's very easy to have that second-class citizen mindset. And like I said, Taiwan has always been a colony. So since our grandparents, it's like implemented in our mind that made in Japan is higher quality, and you speak English. If you have a English accent, you're a higher class family, and if you have a Hokkien accent, you're lower class. And where did that come from? So it's no longer a colony, but the mindset is still with us. Like white teachers are getting paid more, or people are still sending their children to international schools. But how many people are relearning Hakka and Hokkien? And accent does label your social class here. So this colonial mindset, when they move to the US, when there is a social hierarchy, right? It might trigger that second class citizen trauma. But on the other hand, it might also strengthen their belief. So a lot of parents come in, they think less about themselves. There's no self. So we're actually working with clients with no self or minimum self, deprioritized self, a twisted self. So this is very tricky. So when they talk about racial tension, racial conflict, sometimes they think this is weird because unconsciously they are supposed to be the minority. They're supposed to be the second-class citizen. What's wrong with that? But not a lot of people would be aware of that colonial mindset that's still impacting our family, our parent-child relationship. And especially when the children grow up not like that. And I want to talk about a little bit about historical part that's really impacting therapy in Taiwan is we have at least 5 ethnicity. The 5th one is the Southeast Asian immigrant or blended families now. But back before your parents were immigrated to the US, there was 4 major ethnicities, right? 外省人、客家人、闽南人, and 原住民. Okay, they all went through the war, the World War II, and the World War II, the post-war transition, identity transition, language transition, educational transition, but they suffer from different things. Okay, so let's start with mainlanders. So the huge wave of mainlanders, they migrated. A majority of them were men, soldiers. They came here alone. The thing is, when they immigrated here, either single or with a family, it's a great sense of loss. They lost everything overnight. And on top of they witnessed the war, life and death, and a lot of PTSD, war PTSD. It's huge trauma, but it was never treated or processed, never. Because no one back then, no one was talking about therapy and healing and trauma. It's as if it's normal, like everybody went through that. So they immigrated to Taiwan with their war trauma, and they lost everything. It's a sense of loss and separation. They got separated from their root, their families. For how long? Maybe at least 40 years before they could visit them in 1987. So 1949. They went through so many years before they can see their parents and families and friends ever again. So those people's stories are unheard, as if like they're safe now, they're in Taiwan, they can just start a new identity like that. Okay, and 国家会养你啊, now you have stable income, you're set. But how about those trauma, sense of loss, and the families left behind? So the third picture is, when we reopened the border, they could go visit their families. So a lot of those soldiers, they had a wife or a family or kids there before they moved to Taiwan. But 20 years passed by, 30 years passed by, a lot of them restarted here. So they started another family. And it's a huge population. They have 2 wives and 2 families. So this picture is the man went back to see his first wife after 50 years. But he went back with his second wife, and all they could do was just crying together. Now what do? Now you have 2 families. Do you stay in China? Do you come back to Taiwan? What about your kids in China? What about your kids in Taiwan? So our, family therapy, we should look into this. We have a huge population in Taiwan. We like that, 2 identities, 2 families. Okay, and also the second picture is, a lot of Taiwanese finally got used to the Japanese ruling, and they feel secured. Now I speak some Japanese because I go to school to pick up the language, and if I follow the rule, I'll be fine. But then 1949, what happened was, it was overnight, and there was this Mandarin language policy. All of a sudden, all the kids have to switch language and switch teachers. And now the language your parents speak is a shame. You shouldn't speak that. It's not allowed. It's going to be fined and banned. It's very confusing. Maybe for younger children, it's okay. They can start from first grade and start learning a new language. It's easier for young kids. So a lot of them, they're midway through school, especially those high schoolers. the social class dropped. If they could go to school and learn Japanese, they were higher up in this social class. And so overnight, they cannot just pick up a language like the younger kids. And some of them, after the war, they also lost their homes because it was invaded by the mainland government. So a lot of rich families, wealthy families, they lost their lands and houses. And so the kids might go through a huge transition, social class drop. And now they cannot get used to the school system. Some of them stop going to school and start working and raising the younger siblings. So now I want to talk about these grandmas. Now they are grandmas to us, okay? But they were these girls. They were fine just going to school, learning Japanese, and all of a sudden they are schoolless. They became illiterate. So a lot of Taiwanese mothers, grandmothers, they are illiterate. Not because they were lazy or stupid. They didn't have a chance, okay? There was society was going through a huge transition, but the women's status was very low back then, and they're illiterate. And so very quickly they have to, go into marriage and start raising children, not to talk about what kind of major they want to pick in college, or what kind of career they want, or their passion. You can't talk about that. You have to survive, and your worth is okay. And so a lot of grandmas in Taiwan, the sense of self-worth is not even what university I went to, good grades. It's, did I raise good children? Did all my kids survive and get married? And do I have a husband? Do I still have a husband? Okay, it's that sense of worth. And am I bringing income? Am I making a living? Am I supporting my family? It's their sense of self-worth. So this is an invisible generation. People in Taiwan nowadays, they don't talk about this generation, the illiterate people who lost school. And for Aboriginal people, I think they went through the worst because they lost their land. They have always been losing their land. Okay, at first to the Dutch, and then the Hakka people came, and the Hokkien people came, and now the mainlander came. The Japanese came and the mainlander came. They were constantly losing their land. And then it's associated with the Zuling, kind of like ancestral spirit. They have holy mountain. They have this religious and spiritual practice, lifestyle. So they lost their dignity, the lifestyle, the language, and the land. They lost everything. And of course, they were not treated well by the Japanese and by the mainlanders. And even till now, they're still being bullied. And there's microaggression in the educational system towards the students. And so when these kids grow up, how are they gonna have pride being Aboriginal here? So I have met 一个原住民 native Taiwanese in California. And in California, at that time, you can already talk about your ancestors and your ethnicity, your country of origin. And if you are 原住民, like Native American, people will get curious. Wow, let's talk about that. I'm interested in your culture. But she was like, I don't want to talk about this part. This is not something that to be proud of. Okay, for a lot of them, they have to hide their identity and skin color all their lives. And if they go to America, they have to hide that part, continue to hide that part. So they will identify with the majority Taiwanese. So that's the 原住民 part. And you can notice there's no picture for Hakka people. For me, Hakka people is the most invisible ethnicity in Taiwan. And they are the minority of the minority. And their identity is, first of all, the language is declining like most young Hakka people cannot speak Hakka anymore. And a lot of times, they would have this, they will have to pick sides. They have to side with mainlanders or they side with Hokkien, Taiwanese. Depends on who has the political power, financial stability at that time. And so for Hakka people, you could easily run into mixed families, half Hakka and half something. So they are very quiet. They are very hardworking, but they are very quiet. They don't want to be talked about. They don't want to be seen. And they don't want to talk about their Hakka identity. But are they successful? Yes, there are a lot of Hakka people very successful, and they could study abroad too, become the parent. So these people, when they, let me talk about identity a little bit. So being a Taiwanese, your identity is a spectrum. There is intersectionality among Taiwanese, but it's very complicated. People don't like to talk about ethnicity because of these reasons. Because it's complicated. And so a person could be like, when I was young, I identified myself as Japanese. And now maybe I'm half Taiwanese. But I'm forced to say I'm Chinese at school. So when I go to the US, my passport says Republic of China. It's very confusing. And so for a lot of Taiwanese identity, they might gone through like multiple transitions. Depends on who has the political power, multiple transitions. So right now, if you talk to a young person in their 20s, maybe they can easily tell you, oh, maybe 我是客家人, 我是闽南人, 我是台湾人. No problem. Okay, it's not like that for their parents and grandparents. It's sensitive, and it's hard to pinpoint where you are on the spectrum. So who is Taiwanese is a huge question. And they bring that identity because therapy is about self and identity. So what is their identity? You need to hold on with something. If being something Taiwanese doesn't bring you pride, then what do you hold on to? Usually grades, academic success, and financial stability or wealth. That's the two things that Taiwanese people hold on to, and they don't want to talk about identity. So after World War II, Taiwan went through the authoritarian ruling period. This impacted Taiwanese sense of security and mental health hugely, but it's unspoken. Even till now, nobody's talking about this part. They still exist invisibly in the society. So this picture is from the 228 movement. He was jailed and killed, but he left behind a family. So there's a single mom with three children, and the youngest one was 5 months old when he died. Okay, so now we talk about this family. When these three children grow up, what do they have to face? Their identity. Who are they? How do you make sense what my dad did? And is my dad a good person or a prisoner? So their self-esteem, sense of self, it's very difficult for kids to grow up in this family because there will be always people watching this family at school. Even if they find a job, they still follow them to the workplace. They'll lose a lot of academic opportunities and job opportunities because of this inherited identity. But the baby had nothing to do with 228. Okay, so Taiwan has, and think about the mother, what she had to go through on top of being a single mom. Ridicule and humiliation, and a lot of times they will blame the woman. So Taiwan has a lot of families like this. But this is the direct impact of the family, like the victims of the 228. But there are more outside of the circle of impact. People who witnessed this, or people who heard it on the news. So there is this great sense of insecurity among Taiwanese people for our parents' generation and above. That they constantly feel scared about their losing their lives, getting into trouble, and they don't want to touch politics. And when they immigrate to the U.S., this is a great opportunity for them to reborn, have a second identity, new identity, right? Even if your dad was a prisoner, but you go to the U.S., get a degree and have a job there and raise a family there, you can start all over. However, what happens in therapy is their children will grow up and come back to Taiwan and come see me. And they will talk about this part. Either the victim or the bystanders or people just saw it on the news, it will impact them, their psyche, 100%. Because the parents will be like, I don't want to go back to Jiayi because Jiayi is associated with this part of the memory. I don't want to go back to see my relatives and neighbors and talk about this. Or I don't want to talk about my father. So some parents never talk about their father. Some parents never talk about their childhood, their schooling. It's all about academic achievements. But you know what? So these 3 babies, they grow up, they become parents, right? The parents of my clients. There are different scenarios, but oftentimes we see emotional cutoff and emotional distance. Because they grew up without a father figure. They grew up not knowing what's going on, only with a lot of shame. They don't know what that is, why. And then there's a lot of roadblocks on the way, going to school or getting a job. And of course, no one would go there and do you need a therapist? Or let me process this and validate your experience. So a lot of third generations, they grow up without any discussion of emotion or just emotional connection with their parents. And this is not just for the victim family. For people who grew up in that era, a lot of them are like that. So if parents grew up during those times, they pretty much had to survive, find a way to survive. And it's a common phenomenon. They have minimal self or no self. Because it was easier to survive that way. Just don't think about yourself, think about your family survival. Think about, yourself is really not important. It's really not important. And if you don't talk, you don't say who you are, you're gonna be safer. At least you won't get into trouble. The Stockholm Syndrome is people who grew up in that era. There's a high percentage of people who have Stockholm Syndrome. They side with the perpetrator, they side with the majority. So these 3 babies, they grow up. A high percentage of them, they will deny what happened. And they don't want to talk about that. And they even vote for the political party that killed their father. And if you think about it, people who side with political majority, they usually survived for generations, at least 1 or 2 generations. They are fine till now. So it makes sense for them to want to side with the perpetrators. But we have to be careful that when we work with the self, parent self, there's this Stockholm Syndrome. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky, especially when they immigrate to the US. If they experience racism or oppression, and how they see white people, how they see their own oppression, it's very related if they have Stockholm Syndrome. And Taiwan went through decades of 崇洋. 崇洋 is like praising America, right? Everything about America is better and great. If you speak better English, if you go to the US, people will get envious of you. 哇，你好棒，这样子. So a lot of parents, they have this second-class citizen mindset, and on top of that, a Stockholm syndrome and 崇洋. That's their self. That's their self. So you need to unpack that when you work with them, but oftentimes they don't want to be unpacked. So we have to work along with that kind of self. Sorry, this microphone. Are you hearing the noise or no?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Should we switch microphone? So another thing that impact Taiwanese mental health work is education. It's amazing. 就是 before year 2000, all Taiwanese students had the same textbook. So, for example, because I was born in 1979, so all kids in 1979 had this exact same textbook for 12 years. So you can easily, and there was only one publisher, 国立编译馆, only one publisher. So it doesn't where you are in Pingdong, Hualien, Taipei. Your parents probably studied the same textbook. That's how unified the education was. And the education, the middle one has Bepemurfa Zhuyin. Taiwan is one of the very few countries in the world that the TV always has subtitles, right? Usually that's for the hearing impaired. Or when you go to some movie theaters in the US, there's not always subtitle. Or TV subtitle is optional, right? Caption, yeah. But amazingly, growing up, there was always subtitle for every single news and for every single TV show. Just imagine how much time the person has to type, to spend on typing those. It's amazing, but why do we have Bepemurfa? Because this was not our language, not our ancestors, our parents' language. This is a very weird situation. Not only we had the same textbook, all the materials, they had to have like pinyin, not pinyin, it was Bepemurfa back then, to assist you how to pronounce the word. And of course, okay, my grandparents couldn't teach my parents this at all. They couldn't get involved because 他们不会 Mandarin. So the kids had to learn everything by themselves. They had to finish school by themselves, finish their homework by themselves. This is a very strange situation. The parents couldn't help at all. And sometimes the kids would have to translate for the parents, and kids have to help the parents. 老师说这个 and we should listen to 老师. Okay, this is a very parentified, a very weird situation. And the third picture is in the old days, even till now, okay, there's always 早会, like morning assembly, every single morning. And lining up is part of the colonial mindset too. Like, this is how they line up. It's amazing. Hundreds, thousands of students lining up, and no one wants to stand out, okay? You don't want to have a different movement. That's how obedient they are. That's how they train our parents. And, you know, most kids survived by being obedient, by following the rules. They survived. So they might pick up the language by having conditioned. If you follow the rules and you don't stand out, you're gonna be praised. And you're gonna have goodies, you're gonna be rewarded, you're gonna be fine, you'll get through school. Even though my parents cannot help me with homework, I'll get through school. So when they go to the US, don't think is like, why would the government wanted them to think? And they would think about 22A and the white terror. So of course they are not encouraged to have their own thinking. So lacking critical thinking is a very interesting phenomenon in Taiwan education. So when the parents they immigrated to the US, and all of a sudden many of them went for graduate school. So they all had to go through this transition. Now all of a sudden I need to have critical thinking. All of a sudden I need to have my own opinions. I need to be different. I need to stand out. So I can imagine it must be very, very stressful. And now they were a straight A student. They were smart, so they could go to the US. But now their English has an accent, and they might not have straight A anymore. So they will go through a very difficult adjustment. Sometimes they have cognitive dissonance, like what's going on, who am I? And then I talk about 天灾, natural disasters. This impact Taiwan's religion and why they don't want to go to therapy. Because how many of you experienced the big earthquake in April? Okay, that was scary, right? Just imagine you grew up like that every year, multiple times a year. What is that sound? Brian, can you help us? There is this weird noise coming out from the stereo. Okay, so this is the thing. When the natural disaster happened, like 9/11, September, what is that? September 21st, 1999, right? Thousands of Taiwanese got killed, losing their homes. Taiwan experienced a lot of typhoon and earthquake and disaster every year for generations. And that's why Taiwanese people, they are very into 民间的信仰, like local religious rituals. Mazu is very big in Taiwan, the goddess of seas. Because in the old days, Taiwan is an island, so a lot of disasters would happen, and it's beyond human control. So they had to have some spiritual support, spiritual beliefs. So Mazu is big. So like the third picture is like 100,000 people every year, or maybe 500,000 people. They will go to Mazu Laojing, the tour around the island with Mazu. And if you ask our parents, I'll give you 10 sessions of free therapy, or you can go to Mazu Laojing, which one would you pick? I guarantee most of them will pick Mazu Laojing. So, so this religious practice, a lot of it's their therapy basically. So Taiwan, the spiritual industry is very big, very, very big. And that's because they grew up with not only the war trauma, the political trauma, poverty, they went through a lot of disasters. And during those disasters, what I call it a collective survival, is they realize the government or the country might not be able to protect them. If you lose your home on a typhoon or earthquake, the government is not gonna help you to stand up again. You're on your own. So Taiwanese people, for generations, they were on their own. So they have this collective survival phenomenon. It's not individual survival. So when they go to therapy, usually Westerners, the idea is, okay, individual happiness, self-actualization, they are important. But when our parents come to therapy, they are not the number one thing. Okay, what's the number one thing? Collective happiness and collective family survival. So if you tell them the concept of self-care, it will induce their anxiety. They're not used to it. It will get my family into trouble. Depression is considered selfish in the culture. Why do you always think about your own problem? And why do you think about your own happiness? Okay, so there's a lot of stigma like that. So collective survival is when we are doing case formulation or conceptualization, we don't just think about the individual happiness. We have to put into consideration the historical background, cultural background, and the family survival. So because the government couldn't help, so a lot of Taiwanese, they rely on each other, maybe raising children together. During the disaster, they help each other out. So that's why Tzu Ji, Fagusan, those religious organizations, they are huge. The people would donate a lot of money because that's how Taiwanese people survive as a group together, collective survival. So poverty is after the economic boom, and Taiwan is relatively kind of wealthy in a way. No one is starving anymore, so people think we are fine. But we tend to forget when our parents were growing up, especially in the 50s and the 60s. It was very common for people to, try to find food. As simple as that. They want to feed their babies, and then they had no food. So it was agricultural society to begin with, and sooner or later they realized, oh, it's not enough to raise a family, and we need to think about something. So what did they do? They go to Taipei. So going to Taipei to find better job opportunities, there was a huge wave of immigration earlier when our parents were growing up. So going to Taipei is a big thing. That made the country segregated, 北部人跟南部人. So there's shame here. If you are from the south and you speak Hakka or Hokkien, there is shame associated with that. 好像南部人比较低级，北部人比较高级. And going to Taipei, neighbors would be like envious. Oh, Taipei means money, Taipei means wealth, better education, the resources. And that's why the business is so condensed in Taipei. Education resources too in Taipei, like maybe 80% in Taipei, and a quarter of the population are in Taipei. Running away from poverty has a lot to do with our parents' coping mechanism. It might be hard to imagine because we didn't grow up like that. We were not really lacking things, but just think about people who experience poverty. Sometimes it could be like two ways. I don't want to be like my parents. I don't want to live like that, have no choices. And on the other hand, I want my children to have everything they need, kind of overcompensating there and become very materialistic. So there's two ways. So their drive for their academic success and career success a lot of time is, I don't want to be like my parents. But also the country becomes segregated by class. People who made it, people who are wealthy and they know how to do business, and they become like higher class. There's a lot of stress and pressure, especially if they immigrated from mainland China. They don't want to lose everything overnight again, and they become very anxious and insecure. So in the old days, there were more mainlanders and local Taiwanese study abroad to the US. And a lot of reason is because that separation anxiety, I don't want to go through that again. I better find some homeland that's more secured, that I don't have to deal with this ever again. So poverty is a trauma, but that can be overlooked because our parents are fine, they're financially stable, they're financially independent, they look fine, but this is how they grew up. Before 70s, okay, it was very common for women to get married and have kids at a very young age, especially the poor families. As soon as the girl can bear babies, they want the daughter to get married. Find someone who will want you and take you. Just get married. So the parents don't have to raise her. So they could get married like at age 16 and become a mother at 17. It was very, very common. So for our parents' generation, it was also common to have 8 or 9 siblings. Every family has 9 or 10 children. So it will end up like the oldest daughter, usually the oldest daughter or the oldest siblings, they have to babysit the younger ones. So this would cause a lot of parentified issues. So the younger boy, a younger baby,
who is the mother, who is the parent. So the attachment is very interesting. Who is the baby attached to? Who is the real mother? And the identity of the oldest sister, is my role a daughter or a mother? And does older sister mean a mother? Okay, so that self-concept and sense of self-worth. My worth is being able to take care of my brother. My worth is going out to work and bring money back to feed the younger siblings. So birth order has a lot to do with family dynamic. So like my clients, they come and I have to assess the parent's birth order. The parent was the baby or the oldest sister. It would change the entire story. And the drive. And of course, there was always a lot of family drama because of that. I forgot to say that, okay, maybe I'll wait till here. Yes, family status is associated with shame. So if you're from in the old days, okay, a single parenthood or a divorced parent, this family will receive a lot of discrimination and humiliation growing up. And usually the mother would be blamed for cursing the family, okay, or bringing bad luck. And the children who grew up in these families, they had extra stress dealing with the doubt and the humiliation from the outside. So not just divorced parent and single parent. For example, the political victims, the family, of course, blended family, like both parents bringing kids together in the old days, that's a shame. So when they grow up in those families, their concept of family is completely different from what we think from kids grew up in the US. And they will want to get out of that shame all their life. What they do all their life is to get out of that shame. But lucky them, back then it was easier. All they had to do was academic success. Because the education only emphasized on intellectual ability, IQ. Only emphasized on IQ and grades. So as long as you can get good grades and get into a good school, you can flip around your social status. So that's why a lot of parents, they really care about what school you go into and what grades you get, or whether or not you have international education. It has a lot to do with social status. So the economic boom is very interesting. It's not all Taiwanese benefited from the economic boom. Okay, some made it, and they become wealthy. They immigrated to the U.S. 那个叫什么商业移民 business immigration. But those who didn't make it would be like, how come you didn't make it? How come you didn't make it? So this is a very interesting thing. Wealth and school kind of determine each person. It becomes a label. Either the wealth of your family or your parents, and also what school you go to, almost determine everything about you. And so they grew up in that atmosphere, and those are the two things they care about. Ethnicity and mother tongue is, not all ethnicities are equal. Not everyone is treated fairly. So this is an unspoken part of the Taiwanese society, but they always say there's no ethnic tension, there's no ethnic relation issues in Taiwan, but there is everywhere. Like the mother tongue issue. So parents, before they immigrated to the US, they already carry that shame or pride, depends on how well they speak Mandarin. whether or not their mother tongue or what kind of language they use to communicate with their families. If you use Taiyu, if you use Hakka, you're lower class. Okay, if you communicate in perfect Mandarin or even some English, you are higher. So before they immigrated, they already had that concept in mind. And this is a weird situation. They abandon their mother tongue and they look down on the language their mother speak. This is a very weird situation. And they don't want their children to learn their mother's language. But some people preserve the language in the US. There are some people, 他们还是会说台语跟客家话, but they are the minority. The majority, they would teach their children Mandarin or not teach them Mandarin at all, just speak English. So it has a lot to do with the shaming history and the ethnic shame. So like the Aboriginal Taiwanese wouldn't carry that pride immigrating to the US. And so the person had to hide or pretend to be someone. So same with Hokkien and Hakka, Taiwanese. They have to pretend to be someone in the US. So that's different layers. You have your American self, English speaking self. You have your Mandarin self. And maybe you have your Hokkien self, right? But this part is always hidden. But that's the core self. That's the core and the upbringing, the family origin here. And this part they rarely talk about. Because this part and this part brings them wealth and pride. So when the children grow up, the adult children, they want to connect with their parents. Which self are they connecting with? Oftentimes it's not this one, not the authentic self, the core self part, the family origin self. It's either the Mandarin self or the English speaking self. So it's a difficult work to work with the parent for the integrated self, to integrate these different parts of the selves. For them, why bother? Why I am fine, I made it. So why do you want to integrate myself? So this is it's a very complicated issue. So this rate, talking about emotion regulation, because I noticed this is a trend. Taiwan has generational phenomenon. A lot of parents, they don't know how to regulate their emotions. And a lot of these parents, they went to good schools and they're pretty wealthy, okay, but no emotion regulation skills. And now their kids grew up, right? Then maybe they learned some from school in the US. And now they're wondering, they're trying to communicate with the parents. And they'll get really frustrated and hurt and angry. And why did my mom respond like that? Why did my dad respond like that or not responding at all? But this is the tricky part, because for a child, the image of a parent is always stronger, bigger, wiser, right? And especially for a successful businessman or successful scholar, they look like this. But when they display those emotional dysregulation, it doesn't make sense. It's like cognitive dissonance. What is this? Okay, but if we remember the history that we have been talking about, they were on the survival mode most of their lives. Hierarchy of needs. So for their generation, hierarchy of needs, you have to meet the biological needs first. And then you will think about you're happy or not. And you think about self-esteem. Who talked about self-esteem and self-actualization at school with the unified textbook? And who talk about feelings and emotions? So they actually, if you take away social emotional learning and EQ, that's probably their childhood, the school education. That's who they are. But they are covered by their academic strengths and their financial success. They're covered by that. So it's not confusing at all if you think about their childhood, their emotion regulation skills. Culture and stigma. In Taiwan, in traditional Taiwanese society, even in a lot of counties now, if a family has someone who has schizophrenia or major depression, it's a shame. It's very shameful. And they will see it as a curse. This family is cursed. Bad karma. You must have done something wrong in your previous life, or you must have done something illegal to have this kind of family member. So I have client, very young, told me, very, very young, okay, educated, so scared to be discovered of his depression and maybe schizophrenia too, because he said, I don't want to be treated like my aunt. And I said, what happened to your aunt? They lock her away all her life, just lock her in a room. They kind of abuse her too, spank her, hit her, and not treating her really well. And he said, I want to get well because I don't want to be treated like that. So that explains why they don't want to go to therapy. First, they will be blamed for being cursed. They will be blamed someone in the family did something wrong. And also, they have that unified standardized test education. They always tell children, if something bad happened to you, that's because you're not trying hard enough and you're not good enough, or you did something wrong. So the parent generation is always having this concept, I did something wrong, what did I do wrong to cause this to happen? Like I cannot communicate with daughter. The first thing they think about is, what did I do wrong? Not what is wrong, what is going wrong? What did I do wrong? So working with them, if you don't take away the defense, it's impossible to talk about emotion regulation or communication. You have to take away that defense. And that defense requires you to understand their history and upbringing. Why do they have that defense? What kind of defense they're having? So I work with some first generation parents. They're very interesting. 有时候会让人很心疼，可是有时候也会让人觉得哇，很像一个小孩子。This is like an empty part of them. They didn't grow up with any resources and education on emotion regulation. And they thought they would be fine not touching this part as long as they provide for the children. And now the children grow up. They're asking for this. And they panic. They're like, what do I do? Well, what can I do? And at first they would try to provide more. Trying to cover up, right? Trying to prove it's okay. We're trying to minimize problem, it's okay. But underneath that minimizing is panic and anxiety. They don't know what to do. No one taught them that. Especially they had parents, they didn't teach them that. And their parents had them at a very young age, like teenage mother. What do you expect they learn? And trauma, of course, like we talk about, they have unresolved trauma, untreated trauma. And that will get in the way of emotion regulation too. So very classic example, like I have many clients. Both generations are very educated and successful, but the scenarios will be like, oh, I was in middle school and I really wanted to buy some art supply, 我想要学习 art. So I told my dad, buy me some crayons and art supplies. As a parent, Taiwanese parent would be like, okay, 我帮你买最贵的, okay? And then he's like, oh no, Dad, this is not what I need. And the dad would throw a temper tantrum. 那你自己去买啊，我怎么知道你要什么东西? And the child is crying, right? Now the child has to regulate himself and then comfort the dad, because dad is dysregulated. So this is not just about our class. It could be everything. So this is a very common scenario. The child is not being guided, and the child has to help the parent regulate. So this is like a classic example that the parent doesn't have any regulation skills to help the child. There's now there's like 2 children in the room. What do we do? So this is a parent-child relationship drama. But when they go outside, everything is fine because we drive Mercedes-Benz, we drive Benz. And my children go to, the most expensive international schools. My children went to Yale or something. Everything is good and okay. So emotion regulation. Okay, this is just to make fun of it. Parents, they do have coping, their own therapy. One is don't think about it. Don't think about it is a big thing in Taiwanese coping. But it does get in the way of psychotherapy though. It's very hard to get parents to open up and to talk about the past, because what they were told was, if you don't think about it, it will be fine. And a lot of times is, even when they think about it, they don't know what to do. Like the political trauma or emotion regulation. Even if they think about it, they don't know what to do. There's no resources. So don't think about it. But they don't know their children grew up in a different environment. They can afford thinking about it now. But they still want their children to implement this coping mechanism. Listen to me, you're gonna be fine, just don't think about it. 不要想太多. The second teaching is really getting in the way of therapy. Anger is a lack of self-control. And Taiwanese parenting is very, they emphasize highly on self-control, self-discipline. So if, for them having no emotional expression, and don't talk about emotion is actually praised in the country, in the culture, because that means you have great self-control. You have no emotion. Good, very good. And then Confucius, they always teach us this: 喜怒不形于色, meaning you're angry, you're happy. Try not to show it on your face. Nobody can tell how you really feel. And that means being poised and wise and stable. Just keep in mind, before they immigrated to the U.S., that's how they were educated. They were taught to do this. And number 3 is also a very, very big thing. When a student is suffering from clinical depression, the parent is still talking about, 你还什么不满意？为什么没有给你的？ So what is lacking right now? Why are you complaining? Why are you depressed? So being ungrateful, depression is a form of being ungrateful. It's their thinking. So I would say there are 2 things in the culture, double-edged sword. One is endurance, the knife, and number 2 is gratitude. It's really, really tricky. So Renai, endurance, to be honest, it did help our grandparents and our parents get through difficult marriages and the difficult times and a lot of trauma. It did. Renai. 好像 this country is 忍耐出来的. Women's 忍耐 especially. But you know what? If the child is already suffering from mood disorder, and you're still telling the child, 你就忍耐就好了，忍一忍就过去了. Okay, this is not going to be helpful. And another thing is gratitude. This confuses a lot of Taiwanese American adult children when they talk about their parent-child relationship and their mental health. Okay, So I don't want to feel this way. I shouldn't feel this way. I should feel grateful. I could understand how difficult it was for my mother. They went through a lot. My mom did her best. So I should be grateful. They went through a lot as an immigrant to raise me. They sacrificed a lot. But this will worsen their anxiety and depression, as you can tell. So these two things, when we do Taiwanese American therapy, this is what we want to decolonize. These two cultural thinking are really getting in the way. But if we don't clarify that, sometimes it will drop out of therapy. Sometimes will cause greater pain in therapy, and the first generation wouldn't come in. Okay, so this is a joke about our parents' therapy. Either you go to top university, you study abroad, or you accumulate wealth. And if you don't have any of those, just raise children who have both. So American culture sees each individual as a unit, individual, right? But like they never receive therapy and they have untreated trauma. For a lot of Taiwanese parents, raising children successfully is therapy, is healing, is very healing. And they will put a lot of hope and expectation onto the next generation. I already screwed up, okay? But I'm gonna put all my resources and hope onto my children, the next generation. So if they go to Ivy League, if they have a good paying job in the US, I'm successful. I'm fine. I made it. So this is how they rate themselves, how well they're doing being a parent. A lot of things that we are talking about today, you might get it, but a lot of Taiwanese young people might be, we never heard of it. Okay, that's because for immigrants, a lot of things was frozen at the time of immigration. And therefore, when they immigrated, Taiwanese American immigration adjustment is very unique. They carry all this intergenerational trauma, the repressed feeling, and oppressed identity, those shame and anxiety of losing everything, feeling unsafe, not protected, minimize self or no self, and then no parental role models, and the pressure to make it, to not make any mistakes, and to succeed academically and financially. Just imagine being a parent on a foreign land carrying all this. It's very stressful. But they don't talk about this. They don't talk about stress. They just keep working hard, go to work, okay, doing your thing. So a lot of families are isolated and trapped inside because the family secret cannot be revealed to other people. Saving face, right? So a lot of Taiwanese American immigrant families, they have those secrets at home. And that leave a lot of mental health issues untreated or delayed treatment because they want to keep the family secret. However, I still want to bring us back to the light, okay, the hope and possibilities here. Taiwanese parents are very unique. They are very family-centered. It's very unlikely they will abandon their children. Okay, all their life they can be devoting to their children. Maybe overcompensating, but they think about their children all the time. Is it bad to be family-centered? Maybe some of us benefited from that. Okay, so that we can have the resources and support. And I have to admit, Taiwanese immigrants have great character education. Certain bad things, trauma were frozen at the time, but character education was frozen as well. Even though they received authoritarian ruling, the education, but in the old days, Taiwan really had good character education. And they continue to pass on that to their children in America. And that's why I can still see them when our children come to me. I see the things that were frozen. It's very interesting. And we have this ancestral wisdom that Western therapy theory cannot teach us. How generational our ancestors survived through those war and trauma, oppression, and everything. They have their wisdom, and they pass on to the parent, they pass on to the children. And Taiwanese immigrants have amazing resiliency, the ability to bounce back and start all over again. Yeah. So I'm feeling hopeful, and this is very funny. The first generation, when they come to therapy, they are like a good student. That straight A student mentality again. They constantly taking notes, taking intensive notes, and they wouldn't stay in therapy for a long time because they think you gotta to be very bad to have to go to therapy for so many sessions. You gotta get out, exit as quickly as possible, right? So they would have this 1 or 2 sessions and thinking, wow, I'm so good, I only need 2 sessions. And then, like in the second session, they'll be like, 我好了，我觉得我可以了. I know what to do now, thank you. But they are quick learners. They are when they really want to do it well, because they were trained to have that ability, right? So I'm feeling hopeful, but I just feel their stories need to be heard and they need to be understood. They are very misunderstood and invisible. And they don't know how to express this. Some of them might not know, this happened to their family, but maybe they are not consciously aware of this, how that's impacting them and their parent-child relationship. So, yeah, that's it for today. I hope the history part didn't bore you. It's like, I'm constantly doing time traveling when I talk to them. Yeah, amazing human being. So just want to hear some of your thoughts or maybe questions. 可以继续录吗? Okay, 你不要可以说. Let's just spend a few seconds to process this with some information. And maybe some resonate with you. I have to say every Taiwanese family is different, okay? Some might resonate with you, some might not. It's not your scenario at all, and that's normal, and that's okay.
I feel like a lot of it resonated with me, just because my parents also didn't talk about any of this. And like, I moved back 2 years ago to learn the language and like to start learning about history. And it was interesting to go on FaceTime calls with my parents to be like, did you know? They're like, oh yeah. I'm like, why didn't you? Like it was really, I feel like in your other talks, you were talking about people who come back and like the sense of wholeness. And I feel like I felt, not that like I've achieved it, but I feel more whole learning about the history and learning about my parents. But it's in such a roundabout way. And like hearing you, it's like, it just feels like that is the route I had to take. Not just to问我爸妈 like, 为什么你们移民到? 为什么? Like, why are you kind of gave up on teaching me Chinese? Or why did you not do all these things? And this might not be the exact reason. I don't know if I'll ever find out exactly, but that might not be important. But I just like, this is what I understand. And so now, it's like almost like now that I know, my parents are like, okay. Like, good that you're learning about Taiwan and learning about the different histories. But they're not quite there yet to say like, this is why we did it. But I'm like, this is much better than when I didn't know anything in the US. So yeah. I love history part personally, but I'm also a history freak. So this is helpful for me.
Yeah. A lot of the elderlies, their stories are muted, their voices are muted. What went through your mind? for other people.
Thank you so much. That was really incredible. Yeah, I think for me a lot of it resonated as well. And I think that what I was thinking about was what you were saying around, okay, well, if you were offered to offer like temporary sessions of therapy versus like going to like the Matsu procession, you know, they would pick this, right?
Uh-huh.
And something I've been thinking about is like, what does it mean, you know, because I think I've done things like offer to like send my parents to therapy and offer,
Uh-huh.
you know, and so at what point it's like, how to not pathologize the way that they have dealt with, you know, whatever it is, right? Because I think so much of, you know, we're like, well, this is anxiety, this is depression, this is, you know, and I think sometimes we tend to, under capitalism, like blame an individual and say, here's a, you know, pill that you can, this is like in Western dominant culture, you know, here you can take a pill and get back to being productive of capitalism because it's a chemical imbalance in your brain or whatever it is. Maybe it's like actually, as you said, it's the history and the social structure and everything, you know, that is actually the problem. So like maybe madness is actually a perfectly sane reaction to these historical forces and these traumas and these histories that are actually too much to bear. And so if we recognize that, then what does it mean to actually honor their agency and honor their voice and their choice and all the stuff around trauma-informed facilitation and sort of working with folks. And it's tough, right? Because you're like, but if we get access to this, like I want you to have it as well,
Yes.
but maybe that's not what they need. So I don't know, it was just really fascinating and that's what raises for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great feedback.
I'm curious how often does spirituality come up in your sessions? Like, is that something where, yeah, I'm just curious, like, how often that comes up as a way of coping, or if it's so separate from, like, their own healing, like, oh, I just go to the temple, 5-5, or, like, shit, like, money, like, not in terms of, like, for my own health or family.
For some of them, it's together. It's not separated. Therapy and by spiritual practice, they are together. So they would talk about a lot of spiritual teaching or religious teaching. And it makes sense why they don't separate them. It's, I have to say, religion and spiritual practices really save a lot of parents.
Yeah.
For the younger generations, they can, when they go to therapy, they're okay not talking about religion. They can separate them.
Is it Taiwanese Americans or Taiwan?
Both.
Sorry, I know this is confidential, but like, do you mean that with, for example, our parents' generation, when they come and talk to you, they very much weave their spirituality and religion and how they process it? Is that what you
Yes.
mean? Okay.
Yes. Spirituality is in their healing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we call it CBT, but for them, their perspective changed through religion.
Yeah.
It's CBT.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But that's how they survived, how they coped and survived.
Yeah.
It did help them. And I don't deny that. But first of all, it's so hard to get them in anyway. You don't want to deny everything. You want to validate, acknowledge what they did was good and you did well. So the thing working with them is you have to acknowledge them first. Make them feel safe and secure. Yes, I did everything right. You know, I did my best and I'm okay.
Yeah,
I did not fail. Yeah.
I was actually gonna ask you, Yvonne, about your experience working with maybe older Taiwanese Americans or Taiwanese who might be resistant to the idea that they might have failed their children in some
Yes.
way. I guess because I'm not Taiwanese American, I'm from Hong Kong, but a lot of your talk really resonated with my upbringing and kind of the context that you talked about, I think really applies to Hong Kong,
Oh.
which obviously was also a colony and suffers a lot of the identity issues. I think
Oh.
not in exactly the same way, of course, but the kind of no self like really resonated with me and my understanding of my dad and his relationship with his siblings as like the de facto head of his family because his dad and his mom were working and he had to just be this guide to his siblings and then how that kind of impacted his parenting style. Anyway, which is to say, I'm curious how you might work with people who might have been born in the 40s and 50s who are resistant to this idea of failure because
Yeah.
their successes have been so substantially and materially, you know, like huge contributions. Like my parents were, you know, the only people to, for example, go to university in their respective families of origin. And for them, that's like a huge source of pride. But to see like myself and my cousins, people born in the 80s and 90s, kind of having mental health issues, it's like very baffling to them. Within this kind of collectivist survival mentality, it's like,
Yeah.
what did I do wrong?
Yes.
Like, why are you telling me this now? Like, was it not enough? So I'm just curious how you might work with that. As
You know, I've been talking to clients like America educated clients, okay, but they still have this very low tolerance on mistakes and failure, low tolerance, and that comes from their upbringing. So you're right, the parents' generation, a lot of times the lifelong drive is not self-actualization, is to please the parents, to see the parents happy and make them satisfied with me. Until they see the parents are satisfied with them, you're okay, you're a good daughter, you're good enough, then they can rest. Otherwise, they'll go to 40 years, 50 years, trying to prove to the parents, am I good enough? Are you happy now? You know, is this good enough for you? So I see clients in their 40s constantly, still trying to make sure the parents are okay with them. So failure thing, so our parents had that too. They don't want to fail their parents or make their parents unhappy, unsatisfied. And maybe because of the upbringing, the way they discipline the children, the way they talk to the children, it's not empowering, right? It's a lot of criticism. They always tell you what you can do better, what you did wrong, right? The way they talk create a illusion on the children that I am not good enough. So we have this cross-generational transmission thing in Taiwan. The majority of Taiwanese people think they are not good enough. And so the whole country is like working so hard trying to make themselves good enough. Good enough, good enough. So they are very hardworking. They work long hours, they don't take a break. If they pass a test, they go for the next one. They study higher and higher and higher. They have this income. No, I want more. I want a better job. Move on. Buy a bigger car, buy a bigger house. So this never good enough phenomenon is, for me, it's painful to witness that because there's just so many of them, so many adult children are trapped in that drive. But you're right, the parents are so afraid to fail. They're so afraid of failing. It has a lot to do with school education. I don't know the situation in Hong Kong, but in the Taiwanese school, sometimes I feel like it's child abuse. It's really toxic. It's really not healthy. Because they will spank you. It was okay to have physical punishment for generations. And it's okay to hit the children when the children answer one question wrong. And what's the message they're picking up about their ability and about their self-worth? That, you know, I made a mistake, I'm a terrible student, I'm stupid, and it's okay to hit me if I'm a student. And it's difficult for them to have self-compassion too. They don't like themselves. it's very difficult for them to think about self-care. Self-love, it's like they will push back. No, but I don't deserve this. Okay, so in the old days, you really had to accomplish a lot and do a lot to deserve something. And so it's conditional love. And I feel this education is delivering a message of love is earned. So for them, I would be like this insecure. Is my children gonna leave me because I made a mistake? Is my children complaining? Afraid of losing the child, okay? So that failure is big, it's huge. It's like, if you're telling me you're not happy, did that mean I failed? And they will panic, because that means, oh, it's like being graded on the test. I failed. So I don't deserve to be respected and loved by you. And it's pretty deep. And if you explain that fear to them, I don't think they will get it.
I'm curious, like, as maybe a generation, like we're children of a lot of these people, this generation, and there's an understanding that like this generation would look to their parents or like the people they would respect as a way to get that sense of approval. But then we, as their kids, are often like, you know, what is there anything unique that we can provide them that can help alleviate some of this, like, to like, is there anything unique we can do? Because I think a lot of time we can say like, oh, you know, we can offer some sort of comfort or something that would be helpful for us to hear, but that's like doesn't resonate at all. But they would hear that from maybe one of their elders and it would change their lives.
Yes.
Is there anything? Because we're just in this position where they're kids.
They don't want your approval.
Yeah, we can't. I don't know, who are we to
They want the parents' approval.
Exactly. So I don't know. I think maybe I've tried occasionally something more experimental. It's like this is like talking about their parents or like, you know, what they grew up with and understanding and appreciating. But I don't know. Just curious if there's anything you found that's.
But after all, getting the approval is a good thing.
Yeah.
It would definitely make them happy, right?
Yeah.
But maybe in their lives, they're always waiting for this approval.
Mm-hmm.
But this approval they might never get. Maybe the parents pass away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Or the parents don't know how to give their children compliment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that is closed. It's like pretty old. It's not going to open.
Like the love languages, I forgot to talk about this. Love languages. It's cross-generational too. Like, they don't hug their children, and they were not hugged by their parents. Very young children, they actually need physical touch and connection to feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe from a very young age, they already got confused. They could just see it and touch it to feel it, to believe it. Okay, but they didn't have that. So they'll be like, okay, what grades can I get to get you to love me or show me you love me? But how do parents show love? They don't. A lot of parents, they don't.
Yeah.
Like buying you a car, do you feel a child will feel loved? Maybe. So their approval is tricky. Maybe they have given us approval in their own ways, in different forms. It's not articulating recognition like, wow, you really did a good job. I'm so proud of you, son. Maybe not like that. But maybe pay for your mortgage. And so this is very interesting, like at work, this is a phenomenon too, the 5 love languages. A lot of Taiwanese parents, they're very good at acts of service and gifts, a lot. But like physical touch, not so much. Words of affirmation, not so much. quality time maybe, but there are more and more like separated family households, right? Dad is working in Taiwan, mom is in the US, or you know, they're always busy at work. And on the weekend we just save money staying home. So how quality can you get and stay home? So the love language is very interesting. However, you know, as a human being, I think Taiwanese American children, they want words of affirmation. They need that to feel it. But the parents might think, oh, 你怎么会不知道? I'm so proud of you. You should know. What made you feel I'm not proud of you?
Gaslighting is amazing. I feel like growing up in the U.S. was like growing up and getting the influence or seeing like other just non-Asian families, like going, I just like whenever I went to my white friends' like family dinners, they'd be like, oh, how was your day? I'd be like, you're asking me a question? Like, I thought we were eating quietly. And just reflecting on my parents and being like, hey, why don't we talk? It's just like my dad eats first and then leaves. And my brother does, and then my mom's like, she's still cleaning. She's like, oh no, eat it first. I'll eat alone by myself.
Yes.
And I was like, what? This isn't a family. Because I had just based it off of like the people, like my friends' families. And then trying to introduce that concept to my family, they'd be like, what are you talking about? This is not a thing we do. Or like, yeah, learning about love languages. And to my parents, it's like, those are like, what? Like, I don't understand. And something I've been curious about also was like that influence on Taiwanese culture, like if people are thinking about love languages now in Taiwan, or maybe they have, I just haven't been here. But I've noticed a lot of like the enneagrams are like really popular here, like MBTI, like
Yeah.
it's like, oh wow. Like,
I have to say today we focus on a specific population, right? But Taiwanese families have evolved. Yeah. But it's another issue though, overcompensating and trying to heal by, how can I say, giving everything to their children. That creates another layer of problem, but it has changed. So what we talk about today, you know, it has a generational background, but now young kids in Taiwan, I think more parents are willing to hug their children and really praise them, say, you did a good job. It's different now. It's very different now. But, you know, it's a tradition, it's a culture. There are still many places in Taiwan. They're still doing physical punishment. Parents only criticize, but they don't compliment. Okay, there are still places like that. Parents don't hug. So we will still have new generations of kids who feel they are not good enough. Yep.
I just wanted to say thank you because I think I came in kind of not expecting to identify with any of this. I always kind of chalked up, oh, it's a language barrier. Like, I was just like very simple. Oh, my mom she probably didn't know what I was saying. That's why she blew up. And I wasn't around actually a lot of Asian Americans. I didn't have a lot of like mirroring, like, oh, are you traumatized too? And I'm walking away from this being like, wait, am I traumatized? Because I feel like maybe I have very much been like drinking the Kool-Aid and coping like in these ways. And the reason I came out is actually my sister and my mom are the ones who were like, oh, we're actually traumatized and there's intergenerational trauma. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, our lives are perfectly fine. Like, we're all provided for. We've never gone hungry. Like, what do you mean, you guys? My mom is the one who's very much like, did I hurt you? And I'm like, I think I'm okay. And my mom is very much like seeking that reassurance. And you do see that like, maybe like lashing out suddenly, like, I never did that. Oh yes, I'm sorry. And then she'll like message me this long message, like, if I said or did anything to hurt you, just know that I love you. I'm like, I don't know how to cope with this. And I really feel like the roles are reversed in this scenario. So yeah, this was just very eye-opening for me to come in kind of like expecting, oh yeah, we're not gonna relate because you talked about like the core self and then the Mandarin self and the English speaking self. And I kind of felt like, oh, maybe my family is very much on the shallow end of that. So we're white China and my dad is from China. So the identity that they lived in America as immigrants was kind of like closer to their core self. They didn't have to like dig through all the layers, and maybe I kind of just took it at face value and got equally traumatized and don't know my core self. But yeah, just saying thank you, it's very eye-opening, and I think it's important for me to learn more. And like just surprising that there's all this history and everything behind that. So yeah.
Wow, thank you.
Yes. Thanks. And yeah, my mom loves the 5 love languages. She loves. She's like, what quality time do you need? I'm like, please leave, I'm an introvert. Yeah.
Mm.
What changed? I do think it has to do with like what you said with the hierarchy of needs. Again, I was coming in expecting like, oh, our family's not going to really relate to this, and a lot of the stories that she mentioned tied into like poverty, trauma, being an elder sister. You know, like finally on the 6th try we got a boy, we can stop now, right? And then now my parents are retired and kind of like comfortable. I don't think we reached that like level of comfort in the 90s and like thousands, but now it's like in the 20s they're retired and they're like, no, we really do have enough. And I think that's giving my mom the space to be like, okay, yeah, did I pass? Like now let's look at my report card. It's time to like, the semester reports are coming out. I think this is her time. And now because they are more informed about trauma, more than me, I guess, but like more informed about trauma and healing and stuff, that she's like, okay, it's time for me to like take out my report card. And like my sister's like, she called me yesterday, she was like saying sorry for everything, and I was like, what do you mean? Why did she do that? Yeah, so I don't know what changed. I think it is kind of like they naturally reached a level of like, I made it, but I don't know what made them feel that way, because a lot of people's parents, by all measures, have made it already.
Yes, and students have different reactions when they read the report card. Some will be like your mom is like, oh, what can I do better? Did I hurt you? But some will be like, I never did that to you. What are you talking about? I don't understand what you're talking about.
I mean, my mom did both. It's like Monday, I never did that. Tuesday, long text. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Maybe
because
all parents have
for some parents, 面子 is very important face, right? For some parents, they still have that mentality. Parents are never wrong. You don't get to criticize me. You don't get to rate me, grade me. Okay. So, maybe they will feel something, but they wouldn't admit or talk about it. They refuse to talk about their performance. They wouldn't do a performance review with you.
I think that has to do with it, because like when we were together, like having that conversation, she did get very defensive. Like over text message or email, like she's very much more expressive and reflective than when I'm sitting across the living room for her. Or
You know what I noticed? Because they went through so much. So Taiwanese parents, they really love their children. They might not know how to love them, but they would do everything for them. That's true love. But sometimes they don't have the language to express them.
Can I ask one more question? Can I squeeze in one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious, following up on, is it Phil's question. So you were saying like they don't necessarily need affirmation from the children? like they did it from their parents, right? But
They do. They want both.
yeah, I guess yeah. Like I'm curious what you've seen in your work to be help. You know, because I think like what can be helpful if, for example, like what am I trying to say? Like if individual talk therapy is not necessarily their preferred mode, right? Of doing healing work or whatnot. Like what are other modalities or whether it's more communal spaces, if individual can be hard, or like somatic practices, or like, you know, what have you seen if individual talk therapy and, you know, like, and also like what can we as children, you know, do that you've seen be helpful? What to do?
I don't really know.
Yeah, exactly.
Magic words.
I wouldn't make therapy the top one choice.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
yeah.
And sometimes it's okay they eliminate this choice and do other things, whatever works for that family.
Right.
Therapy could work for them when you say, if you come in, how this is gonna benefit your daughter, how this is gonna help your daughter. They would come.
That's tricky.
That's one of the only scenarios they're so willing to help. Okay, so you're not coming to get healed, you're not coming here to get fixed, but you come here to help. So it works with a lot of elderlies in Taiwan, because elderlies, they don't like therapy, right? Who are you to teach me about life? But if you tell them, can you do me a favor, because this is really gonna help my job. And this is gonna help other people if I learn this from you. And then so they are willing to help. This is how you phrase it. And how you position yourself. So definitely not the expert. So for some of you, I guess you're still processing and you're welcome to stay and have a dialogue. I'm gonna stay here for a while. Maybe we can get a drink upstairs. Maybe you'll talk more. But thank you for coming here today. And we have 3 more relevant topics coming up. If you're interested, you go back to Facebook and check it out.
Thank you.
And in the future ones, we get to blame everything on our parents, don't worry.